Once you have gotten your first project into the cloud, once you've gotten that first win and you've created some goodwill and your organization is starting to appreciate some of the capabilities and advantages of the cloud, at that moment it's a good point to start building your foundation, to put in place those building blocks. One of the recommendations is to create a cloud center of excellence. Here you can reach out and try to identify those people in your organization that have high potential, that are excited, that are deeply passionate about this direction. And you can bring them in and you can start to create that team that will provide some support. You'll want to have some cross-functional expertise here. You'd want to have somebody from networks. You'll want to have somebody from storage. You'll want to have somebody from testing, and in general, as much coverage as you can get from your organization. One of the interesting things that happens as you start to move into cloud, a lot of the traditional roles will be automated in cloud. When you move to DevOps, for example, testing will certainly change, and in some cases, the traditional testing role will disappear. You also need to decide how much autonomy and centralization you're going to provide. A lot of organizations are built into or are baked into the traditional role where central IT governs the use of technology and mandates how something should be used. Oftentimes, when you're moving onto these new technologies, what you want to do is the opposite. You want to make it attractive. You want to make it easy to use. You want to make it exciting. And you want to win over your organization. Other questions that you might want to address within that central function are questions such as security, compliance, and standards. And when you're building those building blocks, those tend to be pretty painful for any one group to create. And at times they miss part of the overall solution that needs to be provided. So these are the sort of things that you can start to offer centrally, and you can give those building blocks to your business units. Another thing you'll want to do is you'll want to build reference architectures. Say, for example, that you're deploying containers, and those containers need to have a number of components, and there needs to be some stack of technology that they all need to have. It would be much easier if central IT provided that, as opposed to each business unit trying to figure out exactly what needs to go into them, maintaining them, make sure they're updated to the latest components, and so on. So you want to identify some of the common problems, you want to simplify the adoption by the groups, and you want to make it attractive. You want to make it more desirable than trying to build your own solution. And an example here would be creating a virtual machine as a reference image that people can simply pull off the shelf and that they know will have what is needed, and they will know it's been patched, and they know it'll have all the latest components. Another one, as mentioned before, would be security. There's a lot that needs to go into security, and very often software groups will defer gladly to somebody else who is focusing solely on that. And by adding that component, you could address this. You'll also want to foster a culture of experimentation and innovation. Once you get further into the cloud, this is the knowledge that can fuel a lot of innovation within your product groups. And I'll mention an example here when it comes to the cost of experimentation. When I was a student at MIT a long time ago, it was pretty expensive to build all of the required systems and hardware that you needed to have. In those days, once you joined the lab, you'd have to choose a machine. This machine would have to be a high-performing machine. You'd order it, and if you were lucky, it would come in a couple of weeks, maybe longer. During that time, you needed to start studying manuals. You needed to learn about the configuration. When the machine arrived, you'd run through this entire setup. Oftentimes, there were certain dependencies that you made mistakes on and that were required, believe it or not, to have to scratch everything and start all over again. There were certain orders in which things needed to be installed. And once you had everything installed, recreating the environment in which you were going to work that matched your colleagues would take even more time. So it was a pretty painful process. It generally took about a month from the moment you got started to the moment you could actually make a contribution to the group. Today, when my students join my group, I can go to the cloud, click on a button, and 5 minutes later, they have the complete environment that they can work on. And so this is a tremendous difference in the cost now to experiment, to throw away that environment and try something completely different is also available at the click of a button. So that makes a tremendous difference for those of us that are in the business of exploring ideas and trying to identify innovation. So this is something that certainly can be leveraged in the enterprise as well. This is also a good time to investigate continuous integration and continuous delivery. This is having to build a lot of plumbing, just like security, and it's something that many business units will gladly hand over to a central resource that can develop, can test, can maintain, and keep this pipeline up to date. The next thing to consider is education. Education has been identified by many as one of the greatest resources to win over your organization. It doesn't have to be also 2 years of education. In fact, a lot of organizations have had great success with simply giving a 2-day curriculum. You can bring in the teams, run through fundamentals in the first day, run through reference implementations in the second, and you can send those technical teams back with the knowledge that they can get started and that they can make those first projects, that they can get started down this road. And no doubt this is representative of pretty much every other industry where lifelong learning is now part of all of our disciplines, and it is something that you need to engage on anyway. And the last thing to mention is that small pieces that are well done win the day. If it's education, if it's foundational components, if it's your first project, this is good advice to take. You want to move in modules and building blocks, gain support from your organization. All of this will not happen overnight. So you want to establish that record, that consistency, that trust. And one of the best ways to do it is to start with these modular components. You can then share those, you can then build on those. And this has proven to be a great strategy. It's no different than building a piece of software. Before, it used to be 3-4 years. Now you can do it at 3 months at a time sprints. So with that, consider these as you think about your foundations after you have done your first project.